Who has 10 between 10 and 15? Anybody in here have between 10 and 15? Okay, less than 10? Less than 5. Okay. So one of the things that Brenda and I have, and this is not to brag, but just to tell you, we have about 75 years of combined experience between the two of us. Okay, and we've seen the pendulum swing in special education, have we not?
Yes, we have.
We've seen lots of trends come and go. We've seen lots of things. So what we're going to talk to you about today are just some things that we've noticed and we have observed. And a lot of this presentation is really based on a presentation I listened to one of my, or a couple of my heroes actually, in the field, David Bateman and Mitchell Yale, who are they're the most documented, I guess, in the last few years as far as litigation and special educational law, and that's one of my areas that I love, and I know Brenda loves it as well, and so we talk about it a lot. But what I want you to do right now is I want you just to think, or are you aware of some things that you see happening in your profession? Okay. Are you aware of some of the things that are going on in this business that may be a little different from when you started?
Oh.
Or has something returned
Yeah.
that we've let go of and we pick back up on? So just think about that for a second. Jot down, make a couple notes, and have a discussion with your elbow partners at your table. And if you don't have an elbow partner, that's okay. I'll come and talk to you. Okay? But just think and be ready to share somebody at each table, because I'm gonna let you kind of share out some of the things, some of your impressions, and let's see how close we get. Okay? So.
When I first started, we handwrote every year. That's the only thing that's on it. Oh, we don't know.
They were carbon copies, they were 3 copies.
He's like, and I called him through.
What are some of the things that
And
stick?
then you could be there.
They're going to be there. They're the non-negotiables that you see. And what are some things that are different? What are some things that make your job hard? Those are little
Well, they
conversations.
see he's on disability, so he has the same as, he has the same as me. He's not coming to you. This makes When I first started, he handwrote. And I didn't have a picture. I had Rosalie and Jordan and Judy brought next. And they brought me 20 folders this thick and just popped them on my desk. And we were going to classes then.
Okay.
I had no clue what these acronyms meant. And the acronym change takes me out.
Yeah. Hey, that's one that, you know, you guys have had my trainings before. And so I'm going to go to each table and let you kind of share some of your thoughts and impressions about what you've seen happen in this profession. And then we're going to talk about some things that Mitchell Yale and David Bateman brought to my attention, and some of the things that I already knew, and Brenda, some of the things that Brenda already knew. But, you know, I was having a conversation you talk about, you mentioned acronyms, okay? Acronyms is a big thing in this profession because we're constantly talking about language and knowing what's going on. You know, you got your TSI and CSI schools, and you got your IEP, and you got your SAS, and you got your LRE, and you got your SDI, and you got your all of these things. So I teach, and I've told you guys, some of you, if you've had my training before, I teach a class over at Alice Lloyd in the spring to regular ed teachers that are going to also get either an endorsement in special ed, or they have to take it just because it's part of the practice. Okay, so one of the things I have them do throughout the semester is they have to perk their ears up and they keep a running account of every time I mention an acronym throughout the semester. And I quiz them on it. I put them on the board and I take a picture each time I leave, and then I come back and I quiz them on those because I want them to know the language, right? It's so, language is so important, but it's also evolving. And I put a couple, this was intended to be funny, but my screenshot ability is not very good, so I cut off the basketball at the top of this guy's head right here. But as you can see, we started here, and the law, and I got hoops are always evolving, right? And we know the game's a lot different today. My son and I just went out and watched the NBA Summer League in Las Vegas. They had the best time ever was. But basketball's changed a lot. Three-point shot come in, you know. We're thinking about adding things like a shot clock to high school, you know, if they ever do that, to speed the game up, that kind of thing. So, always, but with the law is always evolving too. The law is always evolving in special education. So, getting back to what you all were talking about, what was one thing, Stephanie?
I just talked about treating disabilities. When I first started, it was OHI, ADHD, and now it's autism.
And you know what, that's a great thing, to think of. And that's one of the things that we could talk about all day. Like, we have districts that are struggling with that because we're over-identifying students in particular disability categories. And we get hit with this thing called, another acronym, CCEIS. It's Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services. And that's where if you over-identify in MMD or LD or any of those low incidence categories, high incidence categories, SLD, MMD, speech, the state's watching. Because the percentage in your district should be about 14% on average, okay? And that's a national average for students with disabilities. So that's a great point. Sometimes it's OHI that's out the roof. Sometimes it's, what's another one's gone out the roof in the last 15 years? Autism. Speech. And they'll hit you for speech. They'll hit you for over-identifying. So what we have to do, we have to do a great job with our core instruction. We got to do a great job with our intervention programs. And if you don't do that and you get hit, guess what you get to do? You get a ton of training about intervention, and you spend that money that would otherwise go for students with disabilities for 15%. Things like 15%. And it takes you a long time. You have to make a 0.5% progress on reduction year to year to year, and then you have to get you have to get below 3.0 in your state in the ratio. If you're identifying 3 times greater than the state rate, then you get in trouble, right? And so a lot of our districts are having problems with that. So it tightens up referral, it tightens up our interventions, and we got to be doing these things with fidelity. We got to make sure we're not putting kids in special ed that don't belong. And I talk to my speech people over here. When we talk about the KRs, how subjective are the KRs? Just these people over here, how subjective? They can be you can put anybody in speech you want to. I mean, I'm not saying you all will do that, but what I know about speech, so that's huge, right? That's huge. Okay, what was one thing you all thought about as far as what you observed with special ed trends?
Well, for us, which I know it's a little different.
No, it's okay.
Trends, things that stick, we've said usually are parent involvement, IP implementation, and things that make our job more difficult is caseload. And it has remained the same for years and years as far as size. You can have up to 65 students, which is ridiculous.
You might be getting a lot of kids that have much more difficult issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Than one we're used to.
Because those variables like the environmental support, the parents,
Because
all those things.
Yeah, they're just once a
And
week
it's
though,
tough.
you gotta remember
It's
that.
tough to be able to
They're
do
just
the
like
same
30
things
minutes
for all
once a
those
week.
kids, right?
Oh, well, not daily?
No.
No.
How about back here? What was your,
I know it
your,
could be daily.
Well, we kind of talked about the same thing as the parent involvement, something that we talked about a lot of times. The paperwork ought to be full circle. When you write a goal, it'll be the same for a couple of years, it'll change, you'll add something else to it, and a few years later it'll go back. But something that I talked about in my own district was I see a lot of progress in the way that we've done progress monitoring. This is my 15th year, so when I first started there, I'm like, what is this progress monitoring? And I'm like, we don't know, we just mark it off. Well, now we know what progress monitoring is.
I'm glad you brought that up because we got several slides and we're gonna talk about that at great length. Brenda's gonna talk about that at the end of the presentation today. And so what about here? What y'all come up with? One thing that jumped off the page, it doesn't matter. Just jump in there.
We just talked about how different programs they use each
Right. I know one that emerged, you know, when I first became a director at Pikeville Independent, it's been too many years ago to count now, probably about 18 or so, 17 years ago. We had this stuff called Obama money, stimulus money, right? And you had plenty, money bag, they called me money bags, right? I had all kinds of, I could just spend money here, I could spend money there. And one of the things we bought into was Lexia. It's kind of stayed around with that. It's a computerized program for reading. And a lot of people use that still, not because we picked it out or anything, but because some of that stuff stays and some of it goes by the wayside. You know, we do have some faddish kinds of things, but we got some things that stick, and that's what we're going to talk about. What did you guys come up with?
I was actually in the restroom.
Okay.
But I don't.
What's one thing you've noticed in your time as a special educator? Just one thing that sticks out that's changed drastically.
Definitely the progress monitoring.
Definitely the progress monitoring. Right. So we're going to talk about that at length. Anything else from over here? Good? All right. Good. All right.
I heard Rachel say when she started, she had to handwrite those ISBs and
I started that part.
triplicate.
I was the, remember sets?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
This is my 41st year she had number six.
And I have, you know, I'm right-handed, so I have a knot right here on this, on the middle finger here.
Oh,
And I'm not gonna, you know, show you, but I really do. I mean, it's still there, and it's from when we
Yeah.
were handwriting all those IEPs, and they were so long. You had to have objectives, and you had to have short-term objectives, and they were
You
so long.
carried it with you.
And you had to press down so hard because there was 4 copies, right? One had to go to the board, one had to go to the parent, one had to be in the due process folder, and I don't know what they did with the other one. You remember?
Mine was just triplicates. I didn't have.
You had triple. We had. I'm thinking we were in quadruplet for some reason. But anyway, 35 years, 40 years. I'm starting 36. She's starting 41. So we've been around a day or two, and we've seen things happen. We've seen that pendulum swing. More paperwork, less paperwork. I hadn't seen that in a while, have we? We had a paperwork reduction act at one point during our career, did we not?
Yeah, we did.
And they cut back on all the things, cut down on the number, prioritize the number of objectives. And you know, the IEP is intended just to be a 1-year thing. What can we get done in a year with a kid? So sometimes we overdo it with those. So I would encourage you to, you know, prioritize your goals and to try to help, because one of the things that I keep hearing from people that manage at the district level is burnout. We're burnt out because we are expected to do so much, and you guys have tons of things to do. But the law is always evolving, and I said basketball's always, I was trying to be funny, and I like this picture much more than just all the, you know, start with the, you know, obviously the evolution of the law. But one of the things I want to say too is that when you think about the disability movement itself, in the bad old days, it was just we had to fight to even get students with disabilities admitted into school. Along with the civil rights movement came a movement that said students can now come to school. Well, it wasn't until 1973 that they passed the 504 law, where you couldn't discriminate, you had to put them on a level playing field, you had to provide accommodations to students. And if you had a disability or an impairment, or you were regarded as such, then you had a protection under the law not to be discriminated against. Then it got extended to Public Law 94-142 in 1975, and we saw a law written that required an IEP, that required students to be receiving services in the public school. If you get public money, you got to provide what? Faith, right? And so we'll talk about that a little bit. Brenda's going to talk about that. Let's go on to the next slide there. Brenda's going to talk, or I'm going to, am I going to pass one? Okay. So the disability movement, this is kind of a convoluted kind of chart here. But the bad old days was like Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. That was desegregation. And what you need to understand about the history of the movement, in our movement, is this movement of disability toward being included as opposed to being excluded really started way back in the turn of the century when you had things like ugly laws that were out there. You had eugenics, and you had sterilization laws. Like, if you had a disability, they would sterilize you, that kind of thing, okay? And as we move forward, and as they said, okay, we can no longer segregate schools, we have to provide desegregation. We also have to think about if we can't do this to African American or ethnic groups, then we can't do it to disability groups either. So we got to start to try to think about that. And we saw Kennedy really push for the movement toward including students, because he had a sister that had a lobotomy and she had all kinds of problems, and that was obviously the wrong thing to do for her, and so she struggled throughout her life. That the Kennedy family pushed from the presidential place, and then the Education Act of 1965 with President Johnson following up some of Kennedy's work really pushed into thinking about and getting ready and prepared for not discriminating against certain groups, and those are certainly included disability groups. So, PART and meals were all about just getting kids into school, okay? Just making sure that we were allowing students with disabilities to have a place, okay, and to not be discriminated against. And then we had some federal legislation that came about, Section 504 in 73, the Education for All Handicapped, 75, and then we started to see that trickle down. It takes a little while. And when Public Law 94-142 was passed, they had to come back later and say, you know what, after some litigation, forced in certain places, a little slow to move. Because when the federal law trickles down to the state kind of gums it up with legislation, right? And gums it up with regulatory acts, and they're slow to force it. If you change it, if you have a Supreme Court thing, it takes a little while for it to trickle down to the actual boots on the ground. And so we had state legislation that kind of forced people to get IEPs, okay? And then we started looking at court cases like Raleigh. Raleigh was the court case that preceded Indri, okay? And when I say that, we're talking about what's an IEP, what kind of benefits it's going to provide, okay? What kind of benefit is the IEP going to provide? And the language in Raleigh was, and the one thing that comes along that we can all of us can understand, because is we like cars in America. We don't have to provide a Cadillac, only a serviceable Chevrolet. Just a little bit of educational benefits, okay. And we operated under that because that law, the reason that was like that is the person that got that case to the Supreme Court was hearing impaired, but she was a high-functioning hearing impaired student. So she was matriculating from grade to grade and doing pretty good, and her parents were wanting, was it vision impaired? It was vision impaired. Yeah, her parents were wanting Braille services taught to her in case that vision problem progressed, and she was making, so they said, oh no, we just have to base it on this one particular student. And what we're saying to you is when you provide services, like, it was the one thing that when the autism thing exploded, that y'all were talking about earlier, that kept us from having to provide ABA therapy for 35 hours a week in schools. Because that's beyond the scope of the school, right? It's beyond the scope of public education. So they held it at that level for a long, long time. And then we had another case. And this was the case that I heard just today that they're using this as a question when you're interviewed for teaching jobs. Do you understand the Andrew case? Can you tell me about the Andrew case? People are asking that question because it's so definitive in what the substance of the IEP is supposed to be. And so we got things like, you've got to have baseline and present level. You've got to have measurable goals. You've got to have progress data, and you've got to report on that progress data at such and such time. And if you're going to provide an ESY, you have to do progress data. And you've got to make sure that you've got reasons for why you're restricting the environment. But the Andrew case was a case where we learned not to copy and paste goals, and that we learned that it's important if the IEP goal is not working, and we got data that shows that, we're supposed to come back to the table. Now, this is a trend in special education litigation. If you're not coming back to the table to change things for behavior, if you're not coming back to change things for, because lots of times behavior is the field where the PBIS doesn't work maybe, and the kid's still tearing the school down, but we don't ever meet until he really gives you that knockout punch, right? He really does something really horrible, and then we try to move from A to Z. So, you see what I'm saying? So you've really got to focus on, from the Ender case, do not copy and paste goals. Do not have the kid doing the same thing over and over and over, because you got the same goals copy and paste from year to year. Make sure you include the parents. You said parent involvement, and make sure that we can prove that we're providing faith, and that the substance of the IEP is ambitious. It's provided individually in light of the unique. We meet the student where they are in light of their unique circumstances. What the disability, we got to be able to document what the disability tells us that the kid needs to focus on. Because what we're doing is we're attacking the disability and the things that emanate from the disability through the IEP goals in order to close the gap. Yeah, we work in standards. Yeah, the kid gets core instruction. Yeah, the kid gets all of these things, differentiation, MTSS or RTI, and then we get specially designed instruction on top. And that specially designed instruction needs to be designed to attack those disabling conditions that cause that adverse effect. And so when we talk about that thing, the trend is data, right? You gotta have data. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit later, but you know, when you get over here to Andrew and you're understanding, and there's this process of reauthorization, and there's a thing here in the state, and we've got risk-focused monitoring now. And I know Dion and Brenda hear about this all the time because they work with the folks at the state level very closely. But risk-focused monitoring is something that's really pushing to make sure that you've got data in your decisions. And risk-focused monitoring also is looking at things like over-identification. It's also looking at whether or not your students are making gains. You know, indicators 4 and 5. What are your outcomes for your students with disabilities? Are your IEPs being effective? Can you prove that you're providing faith? How do you prove that you're providing faith? And all those kinds of good things. But that's when things go wrong, we get policies handed down to us from OERS and OSEP. This is the Office of Education Rehab Services, and this is Office of Special Education Programs, and in the OCR is Office of Civil Rights. OCR oversees 504, and these other two oversee IDEA law, okay? And we know that with IDEA law, there's certain things that need to be coming. So we can go on to the next slide. And Brenda is going to talk to you about trend number 2.
Oh,
I always feel like someone's watching.
Well, that's because they are. If you noticed Infinite Campus, KDE has the rights to get into your Infinite Campus and look at things, and they have people hired to do such. They randomly go in and look at folders and look at IEPs, just to see if the district has a systemic issue. So they pretty much already know your issue before they come in. So they're always looking. They're looking to see what you're doing good and what you need help on. And then what you need help on, that's when we get called in to come in to help you guys. So don't feel bad. And I hate they put this pretty little kitty on there because it looks something like mine. But, you know, it should be something evil looking. But anyway, yeah, they're always watching us. And if we don't correct our errors, then we get in trouble. All right, parents can hold school officials responsible for failures in delivering your special education services. So we've got the 2 different ways that you can get into trouble. And they just hired a new guy at KDE to investigate stuff. So they just hired him, what did they say, a week ago or something, because he wasn't there.
Yeah. I couldn't see it, so I'm going to tell them what it says. 2 ways to be cited.
Oh,
Okay?
That's
2 ways to be
pretty
cited. Yeah.
but I didn't know they couldn't see it.
Yeah.
All right, but these are the 2 ways that you can be cited. So we have to make sure that we dot our I's, we cross our T's, we look over it, we make sure that we read the conference summary out loud to where everybody can hear it. in case there's something that needs to be added or something needs to be taken out. So, we need to be doing those types of things because we don't want anybody coming in and doing any kind of investigation. You may end up in a mediation or even worse, a court case or something. So, we just need to make sure that we're doing everything that to our best face ever, and we're not rushing through trying to get things done. And I know that's one thing that we have a hard time with because we got to teach. Okay, so they can file, here we go, they can file a due process hearing. And when that happens, we have 15 days after receiving that parent complaint that we must meet. We got to meet, and we have to try to do a resolution to see if we can go ahead and say, come to an agreement with the parent and the school district. And that's what we try to do. We try to resolve that complaint. We can go to due process hearing, and either party may appear to court. Most of the times, both parties are there. If not, if I was a judge, I'd be wondering why one party wasn't there. But both parties need to be there. They need to state their evidence, those types of things. And there are parents out there that keep every IEP, keep every conference summary, they keep all the paperwork. Then you have those that leave it laying, and you have to pick it up and shred it. So we have to make sure that we know what we have in our IEPs. We have included the parent, because the Andrew case was one of the big pieces in there that didn't include the parent. And my question to that was, why did they wait so long to tell that they didn't include them? I would have been that year, or we having an ARC meeting or something, didn't include it. But anyway, that was one of the things that happened in that Andrew case. So, and these are just two of those pieces. The state does have a mediator that will go out and try to do some mediation with the parents or guardians and the school district. But anyway, anybody can file the complaint. All they do is they call KDE, they file a complaint, then KDE turns around. They have to do an investigation. The school also does the investigation. Your school district also does an investigation too, and see if you all are on the right track with both of them, because sometimes the parents can exaggerate, and sometimes they're in the right. So we want to make sure that we're all playing together. We're not trying to do something against the parents, because that's not what we're here for. So they can also file another complaint with the Office of Civil Rights of that 504. So not only is special ed involved with all these pieces, your 504 kids are the same boat with them. Okay, the parents can file complaints with the United States Department of Justice under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there's so many ways that they can file a complaint, and so many different agencies that they can file a complaint. I mean, a lot of our parents don't know this, but there are some educated ones that they do get advocates, they do get all this information, and then once they get their information, then they come after you if you're not willing to work with them. Are there anything else that you wanted to do with the?
Well, I was just going to.
I saw you standing there, so I knew that.
Well, I was just going to say with 504, are you seeing a lot of 504 trends? Do you see a lot of 504s in your program? If a student, this goes back to child fine law, okay? If a student is regarded as having a disability, they can qualify for 504 without, of course, you have procedures that you have to follow, and Brenda Combs put those in place for us. Teresa Combs put them in place. Brenda Combs has made sure we were all educated about it. The one thing I want to say is, if you are regarded as having an impairment that impedes a major life activity, you have protection under that 504 law. That's a civil rights thing, okay? That's a civil right. So you have the right to have accommodations, even though you may not qualify for one of those 14 disability categories, okay? Now, when you do qualify for one of those 14 disability categories in the state of Kentucky, including DD and MMD and FMD, You know, some people say there's 13, some 14. We call it 14 in Kentucky. When you do, you also have a student that qualifies needs what? To meet the criteria, to need special design instruction because there's an adverse effects, 3-pronged, right, for eligibility. So, but you also get accommodations, right? So you don't have 2 plans, right? If a kid needs an accommodation for some type of medical problem, or if they have an accommodation where they need an accommodation for, maybe they don't qualify as an SLD in reading, but they qualify in math, but they do have an impairment that impedes that. They may need extended time to get their math completed, or they may need, something. But what I'm saying is, all kids that have IEPs also have 504 protection. But all 504 kids don't get IEPs.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? It's a little bit confusing, but I wanted to point that out. And one thing I will say to you is if you ever have one of these complaints filed on you, so you encourage, if there are 504 plans in your school, make sure that your regular ed teachers are aware and know what, I know it's outside the realms of idea, but it's not really, okay? It is, but it isn't. It doesn't fall under our job, but we gotta make sure that we understand that it can really, really take some time away from your district and it can take money from your district. So that's a big piece.
And they also have to be revised every year.
And the reason, and the reason that, the reason this is a trend is because in other places in America, they're starting to see lots of these plans. Because a few years back, they expanded the services under life activities and included things like doing reading, doing math, and learning. And so it added the academic piece, and so that complicated things a little bit because it used to just be you hardly ever saw one, and if you did, it was kids got nut allergy, and we got to have a plan in place, right? So it's a little bit. It's a little bit more. Okay, so we're ready to go to trend 3. And so I wanted you just to take a minute, and I want you to do an activity with me here, okay? I want you to take these 2 acronyms, and I want you just to Google them, okay? Everybody's got their device. I know you do. Get them out. Some of you are texting and having things you have to take care of. And we understand. We just had executive functioning. You got to be able to Google and text and do all these things at the same time, right? So that's okay. So what we want you to do is we just want you to Google FAPE and just jot down what it says. If you can tell me what those acronyms mean and what we have to do with those 2 things. So it says the primary obligation of special educators is to develop a special education program that confers a free appropriate public education, or a FAPE. What does that mean? What does that mean? Just jot it down in your own words. After you read about it, jot it down in your own words what it means to you to provide a FAPE, because that is our major job. And then that secondary obligation is to make sure when we provide that FAPE that we're providing it in the correct place. Man, is there a ton of stuff on it, right? You can read and read and read about FAPE and LRE. My coaching voice took over, I'm sorry. I had to move Cindy out of that ring next to us. Yeah. After you get LRE done, go back and look and see what puts the A in faith. What sticks out on appropriate? Because it's really what everything hinges on. What drives appropriateness of programming that we provide? Go back and look at that and be ready to share that. And if you want to have a discussion about your notes that you took with your elbow partner, you're free to do that as well. If we were doing a real engagement piece, we would have you do that on your own, and then we would have you discuss it with your neighbor, and then maybe rewrite your answer and be ready to get up and share that, right? We're not going to do that today because we don't have a lot of time, and I'm real talkative. A lot of writing, huh? All right.
Well, we might be out
It's okay.
Look at
So what I want you to do now, I want you to focus. Yeah. What makes what puts the A in faith? If we're going to put a title on this lesson, what puts the A in faith? And what drives LRE? What puts the A in faith? And what drives LRE? That's what we really want to know. See how we kind of pulled that out? Kind of get us rooting that, kind of an elementary understanding of each word, but A is the key. A is the key, and then what drives that LRE?
You know what's over this thing like, you know, it's right in the sheet.
Okay, let's try to bring it together. Or do you need a little bit more time to work? We good? Kind of gauging the room here. We good? Okay. So, what does it mean in this context? Free. If you're talking about faith, you're talking about providing education to students with disabilities and 504 plans. What does free mean?
Well, it means that whatever that child needs to be on the same playing field as all the other students, that no cost.
Yeah.
As far as if they need a reading program or they need some type of aid for visualization or anything like that, that cost is not an issue.
And we just did ARC chairperson training last week. Kelly was over. And one of the things we talked about was the cost issue. It's a no-no to talk about that in ARC meeting. And you can't tell. If something arises based on data that the student needs, we have to get it.
Oh, really?
We have to get it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Faith is free.
I'm kidding.
Faith is free. Faith, yeah. So, what is not free in regards to their education?
If it doesn't help with their academic, it's not related to.
Progress, right?
Yes. The school
Progress. And you get a little fuzzy when you get into extracurriculars and transportation and things of that nature, but things like locker fees and things that we would assess fees to all kids.
Well, like providing a bus
Yeah.
for a child who is in a wheelchair to participate in an extracurricular activity.
You gotta provide.
I know that's a situation that we've had.
Gotta provide, right? And so you have to put them on a level playing field, like you said, right? All right, so let's jump to P, the public piece. Let's go here to my speech friends. What do y'all have about? What do y'all think about when you say when you're breaking that public down or breaking that faith down? What's public mean? What does it mean in this context?
You're gonna have to see private therapy, private services.
Perfect. That's perfect. So what she said was, What's the opposite of public? Private, right? If kids go to private school, they're denying faith, right, in most cases. Now, we do have some flow-through dollars, so it complicated, there's always a loophole or a clause in the law. So the P part, public, means some things, right? Public means we got to adhere to certain regulations, right? We are audited by the state and by the federal government. There's a certain thing called general supervision that the state has to provide general supervision over these programs in order to continue to get federal funding that flow through. And then if you go to a private school, you've denied your faith, you've denied the IEP services, but then there still might be within your district, if you've got a parochial school, a Catholic school that's private or whatever, the kids going over there, we might meet with them and say, well, we got $7,500 that we can spend on speech until it runs out for any kid over here that you think needs it. And you confer with that group. So public means just that. It's public, it's free as long as it's public, and it's going to be there. We have to provide what the kid needs in order to make progress within the curriculum if they're found to be a student with a disability. And we're bound and determined to find those kids, right? And then the education piece, what do you think about that? How does it fit in this context? Y'all have anything on the education part?
I mean, it's all
Guarantee
education.
students with disabilities receive related services.
Okay.
It's education and related services.
It's education, it's services and education, it kind of goes hand in hand, right? Now, when we circle back to the A part, okay, we'll go through these again. But when we circle back to the A part, what is it that makes the services appropriate? That's the big hinge. That's the big hinge. What makes it appropriate?
You have to meet the
Students'
students'
needs.
unique needs.
Right. Where'd that language come from, Rachel? You said unique.
I Googled the law on that.
You Googled the law on that. You know where that really came from? It came from the Andrew case. That was Justice John Roberts' own words. In light of a student's unique circumstance, we have to meet them where they are and provide them what they need, right?
I didn't look for injury rights.
Yeah, and that's okay. But Andrew drives a lot of this appropriate talk. Because what used to be appropriate with Raleigh is a little bit more wide open. We've been doing it in Kentucky anyway. We've been providing more than a floor of opportunity for students to make progress. We've been doing more things for them. But we really have to look at each case individually and say, this is what's appropriate for this kid right now, this place and time. This is what the disability is causing the issue with, and this is how we have to attack it. Now, how do we prove that we've done what we said we set out to do in that ARC meeting where we planned that annual review and we wrote that nice IEP? How do we prove that we have done what we said we were going to do? And what makes that IEP appropriate? That's the next question
If it
on the process,
shows,
right?
the student shows progress under that plan. If they
Progress,
show
Mom?
progress.
Yeah. And so goals have to be what?
Appropriate,
And what?
unique.
And what?
Measurable.
And measurable and observable. You have to be able to count, hear, and see in time. You gotta put verbs in there that make sense, that you can measure. And you gotta put a measurable tool in there that you can measure that verb with, okay? You can't copy and paste goals year after year after year after year. If it's not working, you gotta come back to the table. And that's something that's a change, that's a trend. People are getting in trouble. The reason we got trend 3 up here, people are getting in trouble when they don't come back to the table to correct an IEP that's poorly written or a goal that's not working, okay? We all think, we look, and I know how it is, I know you guys got tons to do, but we have got to figure out a way to streamline the process a little bit so that if the kid's not making progress, we review it and we make a change. We can change SDI without having a big to-do, right? But if there's a real change or we're going to change the goal entirely, we got to come back to that table and have that ARC meeting. And nobody wants to have more than 15 ARC meetings a year, right? That's just a bad answer, right? You got 15 folders, you got 15 meetings, right? That's all I'm doing, right? Well, that's what's getting people in trouble, especially in the realm of behavior. okay? And so I wanted to throw that out there. Go on through the
I
slides.
have a question.
Okay, question.
Okay, I work in preschool and it's not mandatory for them to come. What if you, like, I'm limited on what type of goals I can write because they're 3 and 4 years old. And they choose not to come to school but sporadically and they do not make that progress that they need to make. And then here I am at an annual review a year later and those goals have not been met because of their chronic absenteeism. I mean,
That needs to be put in your preschool policy. I had that in mind. They missed so many days, then we took them off.
Yeah.
Unless they had doctor,
yes, okay.
And you can always
Because like
get
it
your
looks like I'm
DPP.
doing a cookie cutter IEP because I'm limited on shapes, colors.
And it may be in the policies. Check the policy, see if it has absentee piece in it.
What's that different language in preschool? Anybody else do preschool? Just have one preschool person in here? The different language is they have to make progress with appropriate activities, right, or experience, or
Engaging in
Yeah.
appropriate.
And they've got
Yeah.
it as a 3 and 4 year old curriculum,
But you can also get your DPP involved if they're not. You know, and I know attendance is not compulsory at that point, but
They miss a lot.
if they're missing
They miss
tons,
a lot.
you can say, you know what, DPP said, can't come in. You know, that kind of thing. So you want to try to get them there. Yeah, because that makes, early intervention's where it's at, right? Okay, so let's go quickly as a review. Free means the government pays for the education of students with disabilities. There's no cost to families, however, families do have to pay the extra school fees, for example, sports and club fees and things like that, okay? If they say everybody on the basketball team has to buy a pair of basketball shoes in order to participate, then the student with disability has to buy that as well, okay? And so, appropriate means the kids who qualify get an IEP with services to meet their unique needs. Others may get a 504 plan that gives equal access to learning, okay? Just a little recap here. P is for public, which means supervised by the public school. We have issues with substance and we have issues with procedure. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But this decides what services support the student gets. In a few cases, the government may pay for kids with disabilities to attend private school. There's your flow through stuff, okay?
And they will have a service plan, they don't have an IEP.
Right. And then E is for education. This can include special education. It can also be related services, like Rachel said, that was good. And speech therapy, counseling, and even transportation can be part of that education, right? Special transportation needs to be documented in the IEP and make sure that you are including that because that can get you into a problem. And also, if you're doing Medicaid billing, it can help you with that too. That's a billable service sometimes. So the goal is for kids to make progress in school and be prepared for the future. Okay? So that's all of that. And then this big takeaway, unique to the student. You said unique, right? It's unique. It's in light of their unique circumstances. We write that IEP. We meet them where they are. That's why we have to establish where they're currently functioning. And we have to have a comparison point to that regular ed teacher. That teacher provides that information about the curriculum, about the standards. And so we've got to be able to say, hey, how far is this kid away? And what are we going to do? And how much progress can we expect this year in order to get them to meet those standards that they're supposed to be meeting, grade level to grade level to grade level. And you have lots of priority questions you have to ask yourself. You have to say things like, well, he's in high school now, he's in the 11th grade, and he's still reading on second grade level. What do we need to be teaching him? We have to change our thinking sometimes about, are we still continuing to try to teach him to read? Yes. But are we providing him with some technology that's going to help him with that? Yes. Right? So we've got to think about those types of things. And then the substance of the IEP requires more than de minimis. Remember the Rowley case said minimum floor of opportunity for progress. We're saying shoot to the ceiling. We're saying give them all kinds of opportunity now to make progress. Do we provide 35 hours of ABA therapy? No, we don't, because that's inappropriate and beyond the scope of the school. But we do meet the kid where they are, and we also do progress monitoring on the other end. Okay? And then we also always include parents. And the way we say to include parents is always ask them this question. What do you think your student needs to be working on right now in terms of IEP goals? What do they need that's special? You tell us what they need, and you write that down. Okay? Now, sometimes they'll say, just whatever y'all want to do is fine with me. Keep pushing, right? I know how it is. Listen, I've done a few meetings in my time. And it's been a long time, but I used to do a lot of meetings. And you can get all kinds of crazy answers, but ask them, what do you think? What do you want them to focus on this year in terms of the IEP? And then capture that documentation in the conference summary, and you've got them hooked. All right? And then least restrictive environment part, to the maximum extent appropriate. This is my definition, okay? What did you all come up with? What is LRE? It's the least restrictive environment, right? So I'm going to jump ahead here because I've been going for a long time. To the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are not disabled. And I add this to the end, to the maximum extent appropriate, because I want you to understand that what's right for one kid is not always what's right for the other. And that's why I would, going back to our meeting this morning, when you're talking about those reasons why we're restricting the environment and we're moving from full-time regular ed on down the continuing placement options, we should be providing individualized reasons and special design instruction needs in those reasons. Remember that column where I was asking you for, do you have reasons to tell me why you're further restricting that kid's environment? Because remember, it's on us to say, hey, this is why this kid needs to be in the resource room. He's got these many needs, and what are those needs?
Well, it also applies to why would they need to be in full collaboration.
Yes, it does. It applies to all of it. But what I'm saying to you is, every kid's not the same. Every kid doesn't have the issue of needing a slower pace. Do they all benefit from it? Maybe. But all of them don't always need it. We want to know something special that they need there. Okay? So think outside the box and plug those pieces in. Special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only if the education requires it and the education cannot be satisfactorily achieved after the use of supplementary aids and services. So, what are we doing that's special? And when we ask the question about special design instruction, what do you need for special design? What is special design instruction? Well, it's something that's special. It's something we're doing different for that kid because they have learning difficulties based on their disability. It's something that is tied to a goal. It's something that's going to be progress monitored. It's something that's going to be checked. It's something that's going to provide skill development and independence. That's what special design instruction is, in my mind. And we had that session on executive functioning earlier. That was all about special design instruction. Okay. Students with disabilities should have the same opportunity to learn as his or her age grade at the grade level materials. So we got to, that 504 piece is all about making connections. You've got a twofold charge with an IEP. Close skill gaps and also provide access to the general curriculum. And then when they get in high school, you got to do it all through the transition lens. Okay, so that's huge. And so that's enough about that. But FATE is huge. It's a huge trend, and it's getting people in trouble. If you don't have the data, you don't have all the things you need to prove that you're providing FATE, you're going to get caught at some point. And this is where litigation is going through the roof. And that's what Mitchell Yell would tell you, and that's what David Bateman would tell you. They're excellent speakers. Okay, so I think we're up to the point where FATE must be provided to every student with an IEP, and FATE must be delivered in the LRE as per the ARC team. Students with disabilities will not be removed from the regular education classrooms merely because of the severity of disabilities. When students with disabilities, including those with cognitive significant disabilities or significant cognitive disabilities, need special design instruction or other supplementary aids and services, LEAs are obliged So specially designed instruction is a civil right, okay? So if you're just turning those kids out into those classrooms, and you're saying, oh, well, we're doing a co-teaching model, but we're really not doing anything intentional toward the goal, we're providing a chance for us to get sued. I'm just being honest. If you're not doing special design instruction, if you're not meeting the letter of the amount of minutes that you say special design instruction is being provided, then you're taking a chance because it is a civil right, okay? You want to skip ahead to?
Yeah, I think you've talked that one.
Yeah.
That one.
There's your continuing placement options that always have to be available. That's why it really makes me nervous when schools say, oh, we're just doing all co-teaching this year, right? It's illegal, right? You can't do that. But we're doing all resource rooms, which I was doing when I started. You want to talk about trends? We were doing all resource rooms when I started.
When
And
I
then-
started, we were even doing resource for, like history, science, biology.
We had those little functional books, those little green functional
resource
books.
for everything,
everybody had it.
not just English and math.
It's a school within the school, right?
Yeah.
And it was all just watered down material. We never
Yeah.
gave any access.
Yeah.
And then we came in '91 and they said, hey, collaboration.
Except for electives, that's
Right.
what we did.
So, all right,
And remember, as you start at
Which one do you prefer?
top, you come down, you're making it more restrictive. And then you may have to answer that question about, is the placement a harmful effect? You have to answer that. And if you have someone that's in a, and I read this in several, is in one district, it actually had the student, they checked the harmful effect in the conference summary, they discussed it, and the school doesn't have a resource room. And they were stating that because of this student being a low MMD, he was functioning, he's a low MMD child, that he could not participate in that classroom and keep up with the instruction of the teacher. It went on and on and on and on. And I thought to myself, I hope the state don't get a hold of that, or maybe the state doesn't get a hold of that. Because they're doing that student an injustice. And we gotta think about that. I know we have to fight and scratch sometimes.
that's a great point.
But that is, and parents don't really understand that they do have to have both places, no matter what. And to me, if I was at the State Department and I saw a district that had all full collaboration, I would be in that district. I'd be looking at IEPs.
Hey, let's check for understanding here for just a second. Everybody perk your ears up.
Okay.
Everybody look at the screen. Which is the least restrictive setting? Check for understanding. Which one's the least restrictive setting? Huh? You guys understand it, right? And what Brenda's saying is, where's the most restrictive one?
Hospital.
The institutions, right? Incarceration, those types of things. So, as we move down, more restrictive, more need for reasons why we restrict, and also a discussion about what we're going to do to overcome the potential harmful effect. Okay? Good job. All right, let's
I think we got it. I think we
roll.
got it. Okay, so LRE, IEP, and conference summary, they all go hand in hand. And what he was talking about earlier with the conference summary, the section F, where you have to put all that, why they cannot be in full, and all that type of stuff, that's very important that you fill that out. And I hate to say this, but we have read some, and they pick all three of those. They'll say no, yes, and no, and they'll put three things out there. And once you hit that yes, you don't go no farther. But then they just copy and paste what they put in the first one all the way down. That's really not what we want. We want to look at each of those on the side over there. General ed, can they handle that? Do they have the cognitive ability to be in there and handle that? And if you can't do that, then you jump down to your part-time. Can they handle the part-time? Most of ours can. But when you start with your low-functioning MMD, then that's when I question it. Can they really be in that, just a setting? You have to have a resource, and that can go. You can have a resource for English, and you can have a collaborative for English when you get to high school. Now, when you're in elementary, it's pretty cut and dry. They just have that one piece. But when you get up into higher grades, then then you have to put that piece in there. The IEP, your LRE, we check for that, and I guess this was in another session, everything's coming together, we've done so many sessions. But LRE, we can find that in many different places. The first piece, you're gonna have to, you talk about the section F, that tells us where they're gonna be. Then you go over into your IEP, and you have to write that little, well, you don't have to write sentences, you can actually put in there on your LRE statement, what classes are they taking in general ed, what classes are they taking in your resource, those types of things, you just list that there, or you can say, if they're SLD or something like that, that they're gonna participate in co-teaching English, something of that nature.
You use those semicolons,
Yeah.
right?
But you have to make sure you specify the content. They'll write something in there, but they forget to say English or math or reading and math, they don't put that part in there, and it says right on that IEP in parentheses, content area, so then you put the content area that we're gonna be doing that, so we can check that. Then you've got, I always call it the special ed grid, Rand knows I always call it that, because it looks like a grid. So we have to make sure we have all the special ed services that they're getting involved, having involvement with. And we have to put, the location is the key point that sometimes they forget to write where the location is. They'll put co-teaching, but they'll forget co-teaching English. You've got to put that content area in that grid as well. And especially, it's really called special ed services, but I've always called it grid. So we have to make sure we separate resource from co-teaching as well. If they have both of them, you have to list them separately. So make sure you don't have those together. Your IEP on your service page, that's what I was talking about just there. In your conference summary, you need to go in depth with your placement decisions. You need to let everybody know why the child is going to be in full-time general ed. Why is the child going to be in part-time? So we must remember, if you click that first one and say that they're going to be in full-time gen eds, do you pull them out for their accommodations? If you do, you better be checking the next box, part-time. Just make sure, because if you write that, give them accommodations, they're going to wonder, are you reading in the classroom when the other kids are taking a class? They can hear all that, so, you're pulling them out for their accommodations. And I talked about this earlier, about that potential harmful effects of placement. So, like I told you, I did see that once myself. It was in one district, and they had that marked, and it just sort of blew my mind that that was there. And I think it probably should have been brought, it was brought to the docent's attention. But, if a teacher or an ARC thinks that kid don't need to be in a placement, then they need to speak up. Can't be quiet. If you're quiet, guess what? You better write the check. We don't want to write checks. Most of the time, they get compensatory time. We had one in our district that got to come to school till he was 28. So you don't get any monies for him, right? No monies whatsoever. So, but because of a issue that one teacher wrote in, and it was about football going to the state tournament and all that. They took the child to all the games or won the state tournament. They had to rent a van. They had to get one of the bus drivers to drive the van. They had to have a teacher and an aide to go with the student. Plus, they had to pay the motel bills and all the stuff, food and all that. So you got to watch what you put in there, which was good. I'm glad he got to go, but that's something that you wouldn't really see in the IEP. Okay, so your LRE statements that we want to put on the IEP, and this is what I was talking. You have two options for writing that LRE statement. One of them can be the sentence type, which you can see there, for a student who receives most core content classes in general education. The explanation may state, Sarah will not participate in general education for language arts. She will receive language arts instruction in a resource room. Or you can list the classes. You can say special ed, language arts. You can have general ed, you have your math, social studies, science, related arts, what all that the child doesn't have, that has with regular peers. And then for students who receive instruction in the content area in general education classrooms with co-teaching and SDI in the resource room, the explanations may state, Josh will receive all core content in the general education classroom with co-teaching in language arts. He will also receive language arts instruction in the resource room. So it's showing that you're gonna have 2 spots on this special ed service page. Or you can list special education, language arts, co-teaching, language arts, general education, math, social studies, science, and related arts. So, the next one is for Bobby, who receives speech-only services. The explanation may state Bobby will participate in general education core content classes. He will be removed from the general education non-core classes for 2 periods a week to receive speech services and/or the resource setting. Now, the reason why you see that is it's going to be removed from a non-core content class. You don't want to take them out of the core content. But do you want to pull them out of PE every time? You got to stop thinking about that kind of stuff.
He's gonna be.
Okay, so
I come
here,
back to bite you, right? Don't get a move
yeah, they got to move. They
Behavior
got to
violation.
have that.
through.
Get that energy out of there so you don't have to go chasing them down the hallway. Here is this, the service page that I was talking about. This is what I call that grid. You see that it tells you the number of minutes that they have. Like 60 minutes, they're gonna have it 60 minutes one time per day, and there's a start date, there's the end date, and whoever the service provider is gonna be, especially the teacher's gonna be this one, and it says resource room for reading, okay? All right, 35 minutes one time per week, and the date ending, the begin and ending dates are there. Special ed teacher's gonna be responsible for that, and it's got general education setting, co-teaching, math. Now, this has got 2 or 3 trimesters. I don't think none of us have trimesters. So we probably would have the trimester part on there. Then you have the 20 minutes, 4 times per week, and that's your special education teacher, and this is for your co-teaching for your ELA classes. 30 minutes 2 times per week, special education teacher. It's going to be in the resource room, and you're going to have social skills instruction. So now we feel that we've got a child that might have some behavior issues or social issues, so we have to address that as well. If you can't get behavior under control, you can't teach. That's all there are to it. Here's the part that we're talking about where you mark either the full-time general ed or the part-time general ed or the full-time special ed environment. And then, of course, you reject it or you accept it, and then you have to tell why. Why did you reject it? So this one says progress data demonstrates that even with benefit of supplementary aid services, that the pace and complexity of the content in the general education environment do not match Tim's individual needs as outlined in his IEP. So they marked accepted the part-time. So given a cognitive disability, Tim requires special design instruction and prerequisite math, reading, and writing skills, extensive guided practice, and explicit instruction in the generalization of skills and strategies in real-world situations. Progress data demonstrates that Tim benefits most from a small group delivery of skills where he can have many opportunities for modeling, teacher questioning, and immediate positive corrective feedback. Tim benefits from an increment presentation of skills. The ARC rejects a full-time special education environment. And that could be put in there or not because you've got it already marked if you rejected it. Okay, so LRE statements on the IEP. Placement options, potential harmful effects. If there are potential harmful effects, better put it in there.
What we did here on this slide is both of those are hot linked. So it gives you some examples of placement options that you can look at. It also gives you some remedies for potential harmful effects. If you work with low incidence kids, very beneficial piece, right? And so,
You just click that
Yeah.
and it would take you to that page.
yeah, there it is. So
And if you need this, I've got one that
she's worked around it.
I worked
Took the
around,
draft
took the
off.
draft off and added a few other things to it because this one was done way back a long time ago.
Yes.
Okay, so now I gotta get back to where we were.
Trends.
Let's see,
Huh?
trends. I see it. Okay, and potential harmful effects are the same way, so if you wanna go through there, if we had a lot of time, we'd go through there with you, but we really don't.
Why didn't you write this?
So,
Did you write it?
potential placement options must match those decisions in your LRE and your services. and make sure that if there are harmful effects, that you do document that.
Pancakes told you first.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit number 4 here really quickly with you. If there's a lack of progress data, and this is, I would say, the number one issue that we see in files across this region, probably the number one problem we see across the state when I talk to other due process consultants, and when Brenda talks to directors of due process across the state. One thing I can say to you, I don't know how to make it any clearer. If you get called to the carpet for a complaint, or a citation, or a cap, or whatever it might be, and they ask you for your progress data, or if you go to court and they ask, the administrative law judge asks you for that, or if your attorney is preparing you for a due process hearing, and they ask you for progress monitoring, if they asked you for progress monitoring and you don't have it, guess what the attorneys say? Brenda's already said it. Anybody want to guess what they say, what the attorney says to you when you say you don't have the progress data? Write the check. That's it. Write the check. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but it will. I promise, okay? So what are we saying here? What's the takeaway? Get you some progress data in there. The IEP guidance document is extensive, and it tells you how to do it. Write goals that you can measure. Put verbs in your goals that you can measure. Put evaluation method measurement tools in your goals that will measure the verbs that you say you're measuring. And yet, make sure you're informing parents of that progress. Because the law is very specific. We're supposed to let them know about it and inform them every time we have an annual review on how we're going to do it. Okay? Now, this new record review document doesn't ask you anything about it. It's the minimum floor of compliance. It's not what's best for kids in terms of progress data. If you don't have progress data and progress is not driving your instructional decision making, then you're not doing what's best for kids. And I can't make it any clearer, okay? You guys have been great today. We've just about put you to sleep here at the end of the day and everything. So we can get up and stretch. You've got now a 9-minute break between the next session.